for a few books. Let me begin with a title which has drawn your attention. The title there actually causes problems because it contains coinage, a word that is unfamiliar to many people still. I will be talking about modernist roots of literature, or literatura, as the word was coined in Polish. And this B in literatura is not a mistake. Of course it's deliberate, and of course it's meaningful. What is its meaning? I'm going to tell you in a moment, but I'd like to start with the ABC of reading, and with a quotation from Ezra Pound, one of modernism founding fathers, who in this eccentric textbook or guidebook for students and teachers of literature said the following, or wrote the following. You can't cover books written in 1934 from those written in 1920 or 1932 or 1832. At least you can't derive much advantage from a merely chronological category, though chronological relations may be important. If not that post hoc means propter hoc, at any rate, the composition of books written in 1830 can't be due to those written in 1933, though the value of old work is constantly affected by the value of the new. This is true not only of single works, but of whole categories. Max Ernst's design sent a great deal of psychological novel writing into the discard. The cinema supersedes a great deal of second-rate narrative, and a great deal of theatre. In all cases, one test will be, could this material have been made more efficient in some other medium? This statement is simply an extension of the 1915 Vortices Manifesto. In other words, in this passage, Pound draws our attention to the fact that although chronological sequences may not explain much, some aesthetic and semantic chemistry is activated whenever a new work appears that deliberately locates itself in specific historical horizon. Pound's compatriot and fellow poet T.S. Eliot described this in a similar and perhaps more articulate way. What happens when a new work of art is created is something that happens simultaneously to all the works of art which preceded. The existing monuments form an ideal order among themselves, which is modified by the introduction of the really new work of art among them. The existing order is complete before the new work arrives. For order to persist after the supervention of novelty, the whole existing order must be, even so slightly, altered. And so the relations, proportions, values of each work of art towards the whole are readjusted. And this is conformity between the old and new. Whoever has approved this idea of order, of the form of European, of English literature, will not find it preposterous that the past should be altered by the present as much as the present is deleted by the past. So Eliot claims that what happens in consequence of such an addition is a kind of kaleidoscopic rearrangement. When a newly arrived work inspires us to look at the past from a different angle, and a different, meaningful constellation of relations and possible influences emerges, a heretofore unrecognized pattern may be identified. And this, I believe, can happen not only with individual works, but also with whole categories, as Pound suggests. Such a reshuffling will be exactly the subject of my talk today. I'm going to focus on relations between modernist practices of writing embedded in the materiality of language and the early 21st century theory and practice of literature, or literatura, that is a poetics and a concept of a literary genre proposed by poets and authors who you know already, and theoretically developed by myself and a few international scholars with whom I have just brought this book, which I'd like to present to you today, and actually my talk is derived from the first chapter of this book, called Inclinations of Material Textuality, from Modernism to Literature. So, Today I will attempt to sketch a line drawn from selected modernist writers, forerunners or forefathers of the approach to find Hiller's liberality, to contemporary creators of literature, to point out how in the course of the last 100 years, materiality of writing has become recognized as a legitimate aspect of the literary work. But as Van indicated, were one to draw such a line, it would have appeared to be rather Shandean. A writerly engagement with the material shape of the literary work can be traced backwards and forwards in history without any obvious and straightforward continuations, even as far back as the shape forms of antiquity. It could look back into the past to include Lawrence Sterne, with his playful use of the printing conventions in The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, to William Blake's carefully handcrafted illuminated volumes, Thackeray's self-illustrated novels, and especially his first edition of The History of Henry Esmond, which he deliberately fashioned as an 18th century print. Going beyond the Anglophone sphere, it could embrace Stéphane Mallarmé, the visionary of Le Livre, and the author of Un coup de terre, Les Saintes and Sonia Terck, La prose du Transsibérien de la Petite Jean de France, excuse my French, in its original first edition, as well as many books and booklets written, designed and printed by Russian constructivists, Polish or Italian futurists, to name only a few examples. A flash forward would embrace some postmodernist novels, in particular authored by writers who have exploited the mise-en-page and composition of the whole volume, such as Raymond Federman, Double or Nothing, and His Voice in the Closet, Ronald Suckening Out, William H. Gass, William Master's Lonesome Wife, and practically all works of the British novelist Piers Johnson. A considerable number of so-called experimental fiction and a few artists' books would qualify too. Then, the last decades have brought a wave of writing that incorporates non-verbal components into its narrative repertoire. Suffice it to mention Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, Jonathan Safran Foer's Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, and The Tree of Codes, and Stephen Hall's Rorschach texts. In Poland, our book Okaleczenia, which I'm here to show you, and Opatrzenia, and Radosław Nowakowski's books joined the line. It was the publication of Okaleczenia and Opatrzenia 15 years ago that triggered off a literary movement and a theoretical reflection and a series of practical initiatives, which I will mention at the end of my talk, that have become associated with the term liberatura. But the spur to formulate the concept came from our working on Okaleczenia, which have given us a chance to ponder not only on stylistic choices, but also on the questions of typography and the overall architecture of the book. Working on it, we realized that we were dealing with two separate texts, striving for a communion, two narratives, seemingly separate, but linked in a subtle way, which we wanted to articulate, but not necessarily in a verbal way. The solution we found was finally articulated through the form of the book, that is, the three separate codices, yet linked to the three covers in a kind of double dos-a-dos. The two outer codices contain narratives set in hospital wards. In one of them, there is an unconscious man lying in the deathbed, surrounded by his numerous family. In the other, a woman is in labor, attended by her husband and some hospital staff. These situations are represented in conversations, with no narratorial commentary. Various characters are distinguished by different typefaces, iconically reflected the tone and pitch of their voices. The middle codex includes a series of poetic pieces in two kinds of handwriting, resembling an electrocardiogram, interwoven in such a way that they correspond to the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, the Chinese Book of Changes, thereby constituting a kind of intermediate zone between the spheres of death and birth. And a brief advertisement we're going to read from this movement tomorrow. But this conspicuously visual appearance, in fact, communicates only the surface story, because the texts in the outer codices hide other invisible texts, that call for the reader's active involvement in discovering their presence. They can be noticed by attentive readers, who will follow close on the final page of the Dying Man part, where the initial words of this spell the phrase, "go to the source." These hidden or invisible texts can be interpreted as interior monologues of the dying man and of the lady to be born. If the readers choose to remain on the surface, the stories and the codices will remain obscure, if not arbitrary. But if the reader dares read the invisible layers, he or she would perhaps experience how both the text and the hero are passing away in this kind of reading, and how the text is being born along with the baby, while the reader acts as a midwife to the baby. So the book also contains a kind of virtual space, accessible to the readers via the alphabetic interface of the page. To sum up, the unconventional shape of this book iconically reflects latent links between the narratives, as if communicating this connection through a non-verbal, material, spatial gesture. In this kind of writing, the linguistic, typographic, and visual codes are combined in a specific way, sufficiently unique to conceptualize it as a distinct kind of literature. This idea was first formulated in Zeman's article entitled Literatura, an appendix to the Dictionary of Literary Terms, published in 1999, in which he proposed to distinguish a literary genre that is inherently rooted in its printed medium, not by editorial practices, but by a deliberate authorial engagement with the materiality of writing. The article, which originally accompanied an